Hey guys, we have the Hare's Pit Special. This is my first Balsa build, and I want to take you through some of the modifications that I've done to it. Some of the modifications are done to the landing gear. Some of it is done to the control rods. One of them that I do know about is the ailerons that are on the bottom wing. So we're going to take you through some of that. To start out, I did some modifications to the landing gear, and this is going to be one of them. I am going to opt out of doing the wheel pants just from the runways that I'm on. They are a little bit rough, that kind of thing, so I'm not going to really play around with the wheel pants. I'll probably end up just breaking those off anyway. One of the things that I did do though is I changed this out. This is supposed to be balsa. This is actually now 1/8 plywood, medium plywood. The balsa, as far as like a torsional wrench to it, say going backwards kind of stuff, I don't think the balsa is going to hold up and you're going to end up cracking it and end up fixing it anyway. So I just changed it out for plywood. One of those, that's a modification, is probably going to be adding weight, but I did reuse that balsa there in another modification, and I'll show you about that. One of the other things that I did too is because the wires are buried up inside with the base plate and everything like that, up inside the engine cowl, and they're sandwiched together pretty good, laminated. The wires are buried in there really well. I did epoxy them, but one thing I wanted to do is I didn't want the wire to separate from that rear fairing. So what I did is I wrapped it around with some masking tape and embedded thick CA on the inside, so that it just kind of makes that bond to the wood. And then of course I thin CA'd everything right down the side here to seal it all in. I know you're going to see the seam when I cover it, but I might be able to hide it a little bit just in some decoration or just the color I use. It depends on where that's going. One of the most noticeable things you'll see is that I also did a removable hatch for the battery compartment. There is the big box that's on the inside that is meant for the fuel tank. I did turn that into a battery hatch. There will be a strap that goes through there. The battery does kind of hang into the box area just a little bit, but I did cut a couple slots for the battery strap in there. I also put the fairing sort of things on the side to kind of help to hold the hood and clean up the inside as well. This here was a little happy accident. I was trying to actually cut the cowl like right on the inside of it, but it ended up being right in the middle, so that's what we ended up with. It gives a little bit of lip for the thing to latch onto or kind of center itself. You will notice that the lid itself is also made out of balsa. I did try doing the first attempt with the plastic that I cut out of there, but I screwed that up, so I ended up having to remake it out of balsa. It is just a bit of a box. You'll see how that all kind of forms in there with the formers, that kind of stuff, and then I put a little latch on the bottom right there just to kind of hold it. And for now, I don't think this is going to be permanent, but for now, what I'm doing is I'm doing the servo arm latch around the screw. So that's just going to hold it in there. I'm going to figure that out. You do have to cut yourself a custom hole for the motor. So I did that kind of like almost flush mount. So if you take a look at it right there, you can see how far the prop will stand off it. You'll see that washer right there. But it does kind of set in there, allows for enough airflow. I did mount the motor mount to its own little box on front of the firewall that's set in there. The firewall that's set in there has the right down thrust and right thrust for the characteristics of the plane. So I just made a squared off box, basically a cube, and put it in there. I've also wired my ESC, all that kind of stuff in there as well. I'm not going to go through taking off the hood. It's pretty standard, sort of however your motor works out for you. One of the other things that you will notice I did on here is for the control rods, I used the flexible nylon stuff. They did have pockets here that I did have to extend just to kind of get them to come out clean. I am using all the mechanical ends, so everything has mechanical adjustability to it as well. I did have to make a little bit of a cradle just to kind of stabilize everything in there as well, just so that it's not getting a little too flexy in there. We'll see how that works out. I'm pretty sure it's going to last a while. That's kind of what I wanted out of this plane, is a little bit of durability. Let's get underneath. So let's take a look underneath. What I did do in the back here is I did make a bench for the receiver. You can see the receiver is hanging right there. On the inside, I do have a plastic tab sitting in there that I'm just poking the antenna through. So at least one of my diversity antennas are definitely going to be facing straight vertical kind of idea, as opposed to being flopping around in there. And then the other one just flopping around in there is going to be obviously somewhat 90 degrees to whatever that one is. So I shouldn't have a signal problem there. If we take a look at our tail servos, this is what I did over here. Focus. right inside there. There we go. So I made a little servo cradle. It kind of keeps the servos so they're serviceable. I'm using the ball links on there as well, so they're very easy to take out, easy to replace if I have to. This is here where I reuse the from these, the balsa. This is where I reuse that right there. What I found that if you do have one of those torsional landings where everything's pushing that way, is that there wasn't a lot of support. If you actually take a look, just the balsa back here, this stuff here, it tends to be pretty thin. I've sanded it probably a little too thin. There is a doubler right here, but you can see it only goes so high. This box right here is basically what's going to support the landing gear. So if this was to twist that way, I kind of wanted something inside here, so I just reused it there. Again, it's a modification where I'm just adding weight, but it's going to be negligible as far as like the power plant that I do have in here. I also used a bit more balsa just on the inside of the box up against these walls here, just to kind of solidify the box and keep everything nice and solid. One of the modifications that I did want to show you is one that was talked about a lot, where they didn't have a lot of roll rate on the throw of the ailerons. And then we'll kind of talk about that here in a second. I'll move the plane out of the way. So this is what we're looking at as far as the plan goes. And if you take a look, the servo itself sits center. It actually sits right center in the middle of the wing, and it sits vertical, right? So, and then you got the one swing arm, the single swing arm that runs both torque rods that run themselves out on the wing. And this is what it turns out to be. So what you basically have is you have whatever throw you allow yourself on the swing arm right here, right? On either side from the center of the servo is translated into here. But basically what you're doing now is you've got about 1.5 inches here, actually. So you see starting, let's pull it down. See where the one starts right there? This is where your throw. So you got about 1.25 inches down to the center of that control rod right there, or that torque rod. So that's where you pivot from. So imagine having a control horn that's 1.25 inches long, based on what that is right there. So I can understand how there wasn't a lot of throw, and even the specs only say, I think, about like 1/2 inch from center. So you see here in your ailerons, yeah, I was saying 1/2 inch, 1/8 of an inch up, 1/8 of an inch down. Elevator, 1/4 inch up, 1/4 inch down. Like there's nothing, the rudder, 1/2 inch left to right. Like if you go with those, 1/8 inch, no wonder why. And then of course those torque rods are going to work because, yeah, I'll bring the wing into play. This is something you're going to see in the foam board planes a lot. Is I just built myself a little blocks that hook on or that are glued to a trap door. Mounted the servo to the trap door or to the hatch, and then just mounted up blocks that are going to reinforce inside the wing for the screws to mount to. So I'll give you guys kind of a look at that. Here's the hatch itself. So it's just about a 1/16 plywood. That's all it is. 1/16 plywood. Just cut it to size, fit it in between 2 stock ribs that are already there, nice to the inside. I didn't want to have to feed the wire through a lot of ribs to get it to the center of the aileron, so I just went with the position, the first pocket right here next to the skin. There is a rib that's going down right here. You can set these blocks right up against it, right like that. And if you take a look on the inside, you can see I cut a slot for the servo wire to go through that rib. There you go. So those blocks are going to be what the screws dig into, and they're just sitting on top of the skin that's sitting right there. What I wanted to really was looking to do originally, if we take a look at flip the wing over, is I wanted to flush mount that hatch inside this skin, but that wasn't possible just with the clearance of the servo to the top of the wing. So I had to actually mount it. Basically, it's going to be a top mount sort of idea instead of sitting flush inside the skin. So that's one of the sacrifices, but it did give me about a 1/16 of an inch clearance. So then it's not poking out and I don't have to do any shaving or anything like that. Here you can see the block that I added to the rib. You can see where the screws go through. Same thing over here. These blocks catch it right here. I didn't want to do a solid one right through because it was going to leave me not enough room to pass the servo wire through there. So I did it in 2 separate blocks. And then again, everything's mechanical with the control rod. And then we have our throws right here. And if you once we take a look at what we got for throws, we'll kind of get an idea of what we're looking at. I do have the one servo hooked up. I'm going to grab my servo tester. Okay, so if we take a look here, I'm going to grab this just to lift it up. Okay. Your 1/8 inch throw, let's put this right at almost 1500. That's pretty much center right there. That's your 1/8 inch throw right there. That's another 1/8 inch throw. That's more like a quarter. Those are probably quarter either way. But here, check this out. Now we got some decent throw. I might even dull that throw down a bit too, but we'll see. We'll see how it works out. What we got here, once it's all together, is you see everything kind of fits in the slot. The slot itself I cut with a drill bit on either side of the position that I needed, and then just sliced through it with a razor blade. Filed it off with a file, or sanded it down with a file. And of course, drilled my holes for the screws. Screws sit in there nice and tight. I did want to have the screws mounted. I did want to have the screws mounted instead of like on the ends here. I did have them want to mount it out here, but just the way the spar was built and stuff like that, I didn't want to dig into that with any screws. And then, you know, the reinforcing everything was tight. This will be fine for the amount, like the size of the surface area of that control surface really isn't going to make that much torque on this little hatch door. Anyway, like I said, I just kind of wanted to take you guys through some of the mods that I was playing around with this thing, and thanks for joining up. Hope this video was informative, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.